welcome to the Romable Weekly webinar. Today's topic is going to be implementing unit tests and running them sort of in an automated fashion. So what we're going to do today, we're going to create just a basic store application. You've probably seen this demo before. It's a common store demo that we use for demonstrating Rhodes. So I'm going to say Rogen app store, and we'll go into this store and we'll create the model. So we'll say Rogen model person. Rogen model product, and it'll have a name, brand, price, quantity. And once we've done that, we will open up our application in our text editor. So what we see is our basic app. We have a model here, and in the model we can do various things with the objects, and we can create some methods here that we want to test. So for example, I want to have something that gives me the name in all lowercase. So we'll call it lower name, and we'll have it self.name.downcase. Or I want to have a function that returns my object in a comma-separated string. So I'll create another method called, we'll call this serialize. Actually, I believe I can't use that. That's a keyword. We'll just call it comma string. And so then we'll return self.name self.brand self.price self.quantity. So with these functions, we're going to need some method of testing them. Well, what we can do is create a view in our app to do it, which is a little bit clunky and can't be automated. We can also do a method here that allows us to integrate mspec. And so mspec is one of the extensions that we provide. So the way to add the mspec testing is you go to your build YAML and you add the two extensions file utils and mspec. The next step that you need to do, you need to go to your command line and say Rogen spec. And this added a controller and model that runs the specs. So if we go back to our text editor, we can see we have a new model called spec runner, which has a controller that loads spec runner and runs the specs, and an index page to display the output of the specs, and a helper here that initializes mspec and loads all the spec files. When you generate your models, we also generate a test stub here. called product spec, since we generated the product model, which comes with the default test. It should have specs, and it will automatically fail. So let's add links to our two models. We have product, and then we'll add another link for testing that points to our spec runner controller. And save that. So now we're going to say rake run iPhone. You can easily do this with Android as well. We launch our store application, and what we're also going to do is watch our row log file, because the results are going to also be output in our row log file. So we'll just do a tail-f on row log.txt. We'll select run tests. And so it says there was one test, 0 passed, and 1 failed. And you can see in the log file the definition of our test. It failed, and the reason it failed, and then the full stack trace of the failure of the test. And you can see the summary in the log file as well. So we'll go back to our editor and we'll edit our tests to test the two methods that we added. So we'll remove this here, and we'll do some setup. Some setup allows us to make sure our model is in a consistent state. So when we do our tests, we can verify that it works properly. So we're going to add what's called a before block, and we're going to say before each do, and then in here this will happen before each test is executed. So what to do is say test model, not test model, product dot delete all to clear out our local database, and then we're going to create our model here that has a few items here that we can test against. So add the 4 fields that we created. And now we're going to start defining the tests. And so the way you define a test is with an it block, and you give it a description. So you say it should lowercase the name. I believe that's what we did, but we can take a look. Yeah, so lower name. And so we're going to do an assertion here and say product.find all 0 dot name should equal Apple, or sorry, iPhone. Product.find all 0 dot lower name should equal iPhone. So we'll save that and then relaunch your application and see what our output is. Now we run the test. All the color is green, and it outputs here product should lowercase name, total 1 passed 1. So all of our tests are passing. So what we can do now is go back to our text editor and add our second test, which is it should generate a comma separate string. And so the comma string should be iPhone, Apple, 4910. Save that, and we can go ahead and run it again. And so we have two tests, and they both pass. So this is great, but as you can see, it requires us to actually click on an item, and then it also requires us to look at the results and view the results, and it's not very easily automated doing it in this fashion. So what we need to do is we need to add a couple of hooks here that allows the test to run automatically and the application to exit when the tests are finished. So we will go ahead and go back to our code, and we'll add these couple of hooks now. So the first thing is in our main index page, we just need to add a little JavaScript block here that will navigate it automatically to the spec runner. And we just need to do window.location app/spec runner. So now when we run it, it will automatically run our tests. So we get our spec runner. But there's still a couple of things missing. When we run it, we still have to go click the app on the Apple simulator, and we still don't have any easy way to parse the results. So there's two things to do to fix this. The first one, we need to make our application exit after the tests are run. So we'll go to our spec runner controller, and right before render, after all of the tests have finished, we'll do a system.exit. And so that'll cause the app to close right after the tests have finished. So now we have an application that, when you launch it, runs the tests and exits. And we can demonstrate that here. So we see in the log file, it ran the test, it gave the test output, the application exit. And one thing we added with our build scripts is to help automated testing, we have a method of running the test without actually launching the iPhone simulator and without having to click on the icon. And so we have, it's called rake run iPhone spec. So when we run this, it's going to do a full clean of your application. Is then going to do a build. So the build takes a little bit longer, but you always want to make sure that your tests are run from a clean environment. So now it's doing a full rebuild of the Rhodes framework. So you can see what happened here is we ran the test and it exited and we're back at the command line. But if you notice, the output here has our test output, describe product, lowercase name, generate a comma separated string, and it gives us a little result here of tests completed in 0.9 seconds. And finally, the return value of this script is the number of tests that failed. So we had 0 tests failed, it returned 0. We can add a failing test back into our spec here. And when we run again, we'll now have 2 passing tests and 1 failing test. And what will happen is, when we go to look at our return value, we'll return an error code of 1. So now you have an application that runs it in the simulator. It will also automatically run the tests and return you a return value of whatever the results for your tests are. And when you have this functionality, you can then put it into a build automation tool. We use internally CI/Joe, which is a continuous integration server that we've modified to run the tests and keep a history of the tests. And if you have the Rhodes framework, you can also take a look at the values there, and we have in the spec folder all of our internal tests that we run that can be run in the same fashion. So you see our tests ran again, and we now have 3 tests, 2 passed, 1 failed. And if we look at our return value, we can see the result is 1 test failure. And I believe I have open our framework spec. This is one of the tests that we use to validate that our Ruby virtual machine is a good virtual machine, which is a basic application that has various specs here. So if you look at, for example, language, block spec, we have the blocks here of it collects all the arguments, passes to yield, etc., etc. And this is our Ruby virtual machine test to make sure that our Ruby virtual machine is working properly. And so we use mspec, and we have a bunch of examples of how to do various tests and various methods of using the mspec framework.